It was reported yesterday that Rupert Murdoch has put together a top team, in fact, a multi-million-dollar team of advisors and coaches. He's got lawyers, and he's got a man by the name of Stephen Rubenstein, whose clients in the past have included Hollywood actor Robert De Niro and David Letterman. Now, some of you may remember a couple of years ago, Mr. Letterman was in the process of being blackmailed, and it was Rubenstein who came up with the high-risk but ultimately brilliant strategy of Letterman actually going public with it and making light of it in a series of his shows, which, guess what, enhanced his reputation, got him more viewers and got him a better contract. So this guy, Rubenstein, is very smart at putting problems to bed. But what would he be doing and how would he be coaching anyone, whether it's Mr. Murdoch or someone else? Well, Andrew Harvey is founder of HarveyLeach, a media training company. He's a former broadcast journalist himself. Joins us now. Morning, Andrew.
Morning, Nick.
What sort of coaching will be taking place now?
Well, it'd be high-intensity coaching, that's for sure. I only wish we were part of the multi-million-pound team that's been assembled. But it will involve, well, if it was us, it would involve a lot of discussion about what has actually happened, trying to get to the truth, because like a barrister, you've got to try and get to the truth before you can start working out a defence. But I think, and you know, there are dozens of questions the committee are going to ask, and if they had any doubts about the questions they were going to ask, they only got to open the weekend's papers or today's papers, and they've got a list which will keep them going for 3 days. But I think, you know, apart from the questions they're going to be asked, I would be looking at things they have to say, not answers to specific questions. Only they can provide those. But they need to think about things they've got to say. They've got to say we're paying a heavy price. They've got to point out the kind of heavy price they're paying. They've got to say, or at least convey the impression that they can recover from this. They've got to put it somehow, and this is terribly difficult because we don't yet know what's still to come out, but they've got to put as much as possible in the past and say it's in the past. And I think the other thing, Nick, they've got to do is just concentrate on this, or concentrate on part of it, as a human story. This is about people whose phones may or may not have been hacked. It's about journalists who've lost their jobs. And I think one thing they must do is show real, genuine sympathy for the people who've been affected by this. To be honest, it's a terribly difficult job they've got to do, and a terribly difficult job for any media advisor. But those are the things I would think about, because they're going to be asked questions, there's no doubt about that, and they're going to be asked very difficult questions. But in between the questions, they've got to make certain things clear.
What about hostility? It is fair to say, not necessarily with this particular group of MPs, but there is a degree of hostility in the House from some quarters towards Mr. Murdoch. That may represent itself tomorrow. If you get really blatantly hostile questioning, how should you behave?
Well, I think a lot's in the body language, you know. I mean, I always remember Tony Hayward, the BP boss, when he appeared in front of Congress. His head was down, his hands were clasped in front of him, he barely raised his head from those clasped hands. And you've got to look the committee in the eye, and you've got to look as though you're not mortally damaged by this. And yes, I'm sure you're absolutely right. The questioning's bound to be hostile. They must be champing at the bit now, waiting to get stuck into this. But you've just got to present as straightforward, as firm a look in the eye as you possibly can to try and counteract this, and go back to those kind of basic things. You know, it's in the past, we want to put it in the past, we paid a heavy price, we believe we can recover, and so on. And try and emphasise those. Not easy.
And lastly, if you're asked something and you perhaps genuinely don't know the answer, is it best to be absolutely truthful, even though you might open yourself to a degree of ridicule, or should you try and flannel your way through?
No, I think the last thing we'd suggest is try and flannel your way through. That way you're going to dig yourself a terribly deep hole. Now, you've got to be honest. If you don't know, you've got to say you don't know. And what happens? All right, you may look stupid, you may look foolish, you may look ignorant, you may look underinformed, but at least you've been honest. And I think that's what the audience, and it's a much wider audience than the MPs, of course, that's what the audience will be waiting to hear.
Andrew Harvey, founder of HarveyLeach, a media training company, thank you.